And then there is the moral argument. There are many inequalities in this life, many injustices that go unpunished. So the Bible teaches that there is a final righting of all wrongs after death. In this life, the righteous many times are martyred, suffer great indignities and all against them, and all kinds of persecution. But the Bible teaches that they will be vindicated. Shall not God avenge, vindicate his own elect who cry day and night unto him? He shall surely do that, the Bible tells us. And then there's the universal desire for immortality. I know that many philosophers ridicule that, but most men and women have some thinking about death, and you can see it all in modern culture, where they talk about he's looking after me, or he talks to me, or when they go and talk and sit beside gravestones and everything else. So you see that all through people that don't believe in Christianity or in the resurrection of the body. But the Bible teaches there will be a resurrection. The Bible teaches that there is a place called heaven and a place called hell, and that the human race is going to one or the other, depending on their relationship to the Lord Jesus Christ. So those things all show the solidarity of the human race. And, when you look at the life after death, of course, the Bible teaches about everlasting punishment. And so many people who do not like that have invented various other future states. So you have soul sleep. They believe that the person just that's unsaved and doesn't go to heaven, he just goes into a kind of a perpetual state of sleep, and that's the end of him. But there's no punishment involved. And then others have conditional immortality. And many Christians have taught this, that the saved live forever, but the unsaved don't. They just die at death. And so that's the end of them. So that's conditional immortality. And you have various reincarnation. Others say you go into different states. The Hindus and other cultures believe that. So you see all the opposition to the biblical teaching present in not only in the world today, but in many, many churches. So that's another error, you might say, that creeps into the study of Harmartiology, because in looking at the doctrine of sin and the fact that sinners die unsaved, then people have to come up with some other eternal state for them, or immortal state for them, if they do not believe the Bible. And various theologians and men of the cloth have come up with these ideas, and they're taught, and you would have to say that most people do not believe in what the Bible teaches about the state of those who are immortal but who are not saved. But that's what we get into further in eschatology. But that does impinge upon the fact that it's people that are sinners who are unrepentant and do not receive Christ. In other words, what happens to them when they die, and they are lost forever in hell according to the Bible. But we will start there at our notes on, and I'll try to get these notes to you with a few prefatory remarks there about sin and the human race. There, C.E.M. Joad, who was a philosopher there at the beginning of the 20th century, and he said the ubiquity of sin, because he was kind of atheistic, I guess, was causing men to look into the existence of God afresh, because there was so much evil he could see coming there in the early part of the 20th century with the Great War, 1914, where the slaughter of individuals was horrific. and how people could be doing that to each other that exploded the postmillennialism and the optimism of the liberals, that the world was getting better and better. Just ended in the death throes of World War One, and you could see the awful sinfulness of blasting other individuals into eternity. And this caused, as he said, people to begin to think, well, there's something terribly wrong with the world if it has a world war in which people get up and shoot each other, and in the hundreds of thousands and into the millions. So, I mean, this wasn't an individual murder, which is bad enough, but it was the deaths of millions, and that caused, when you look at that world war, it was probably the worst war ever in human history that resulted from so many deaths. Because that one battle there, the Battle of the Somme, in which some of my relatives died and fought in and survived, because there was a whole Ulster contingent there that was almost wiped out, so that Ulster was in a state of mourning across the entire province. But that, there was at least over 1 million of the Allies killed and an equal number of Germans. So there was, I think it was 1.7 million people died in one battle. And it said none of the main objectives was attained, but 7 miles. They gained an advance of 7 miles. It cost close to 2 million deaths. It's hard to get your mind around that, but it certainly showed, as he said, there was something terribly wrong with man. He wasn't this angelic person that many people were trying to make out at the end of the 19th century. The problem of sin, the origin of sin, is a great mystery. It has always been considered one of the most profound problems in philosophy or theology. In other words, it's hard, and so people deny sin. And I knew one student that went to a Baptist college in Florida, and he said that to me. He said, the philosophy, or the professor I said under, he says there's no such thing as sin. So you still get that of me, even after all the murders and all the immorality and all of the sin that is obvious, and all of the graveyards that show the penalty of sin, because the penalty of sin is death. For death passed upon all men, that all have sinned. Romans 5:12, which is really one of the crucial verses of the Bible. Because sin not only came in by Adam, but it passed unto all men. And it says, for all have sinned, because all men then sin. The sinfulness of Adam was passed down, which Pelagianism denies. So Pelagianism not only denies the bondage of the will, to do that they deny the fall of Adam. They say Adam sinned, but his sin was only his own, and that he could be all right the next day, that nothing happened. There was no fallen nature that was transmitted to his posterity. It was just his sin, and they could look at that and learn from it a bad habit that Adam had, but they were not given a fallen human nature that was dead in trespass, and that was the teaching of Pelagius. And of course he denied the bondage of the will. He denied then that the will of man was free, because it wasn't affected by Adam's fall. So that's why Luther said you deny Christ when you deny the bondage of the will, teach free will, because then you can come to Christ. Christ doesn't need to seek you and seek the lost. You can come there yourself when you feel like it, when your will turns that way. But anyway, sin is difficult to define. It forces itself upon the attention of man. Its universal presence is everywhere, and its repugnance is everywhere. People hate to look at people who have been murdered and look at the different things, or if their house is ransacked, and they're all upset. So it's hurt and consequences all combine force and force man to recognize its presence. But as I say, in recent years, psychology has tried to account for many things that before were put down to the fact that man was a sinner, because most modern psychologists do not believe that. In fact, most educators and most schools no longer teach that man is fallen, and fallen in such a way that he's helpless to extricate himself from his fall except by divine intervention. Very few people believe that today. Very few ministers believe that today. So we have our work cut out for us to revive interest in the truth. You know, I'm nearing the end of my ministry, one way or the other. But you know, you have to do everything you can. And it's not that we're going to turn the tide, you know, tomorrow but the thing is, I always think back to the defeat of Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler, you know, like Napoleon was defeated at Waterloo, but Napoleon and Hitler both were defeated long before their finals, because both went to Russia. And you see, Napoleon, he had the largest army. That's why he was undefeated on the land. And all these, groups, they would all get together and make their treaties with England, with Prussia, and with France, or not with France, but with Prussia and with Russia and others, and then they would go together and they'd all be defeated on the land. The only thing that saved England was that Lord Nelson, he defeated various enemy armadas in different places and kept England free from invasion. But they were all defeated on the land until Napoleon went to Russia. And that's when he suffered his great defeat, and he was repulsed. And then the Russian winter set in, and his proud army was almost obliterated by the time it got back from Russia, with the Russians all snapping at its heels, killing them along the way, starvation, the lack of every cold and everything wiped the greater part. Hitler went in a three-pronged attack into Russia, into Moscow, into Stalingrad, and down into Sebastopol. Because the first time that Germany invaded Russia in the First World War, the battle was over in 10 weeks. Because Russia fell to communism and was all divided within itself, so then it sued for peace right away with Germany, and then Germany. So when Hitler went in, he thought he was going in for another 10 weeks or so. And then when they ran up, first of all, they made terrific progress. Their big panzer divisions just went through the early parts of Russia. But then they got stopped at Sebastopol, but they finally took it. They got stopped at Moscow and didn't take it. So that's where Hitler suffered his first reverse. And it was a terrible reverse, because they started back like Napoleon, and again the Russians followed after, wiping out large numbers. But he took his worst defeat in Stalingrad. Stalingrad was in the middle. He went in there, and Stalingrad was a rubble almost, but it never surrendered. And so it started its counterattack and took out thousands upon thousands of German people, soldiers, prisoners, and took all their mechanized panzer divisions, their pride of the German forces. And most people then, all around that area, down into Yugoslavia and all, they said that's the war is lost. Hitler's lost the war. Of course, that was never told, because people didn't like Russia, because it was communistic. So it was all the two divisions that they fought with in Western Europe was given all the credit, whereas they had opposed 8 divisions in Russia. But how did they do that, I always think of it. Because they didn't have the big mechanized, so it was little men throwing hand grenades and different things at the tanks of the big panzer divisions and stopped them. They finally stopped them. But the war wasn't over, and most of them were all killed. That's the way I look at it. You have to stop the advance of Rome in America. That's the task, to stop it, and then hopefully go on to destroy it completely. People don't know their history, because I could tell by reading these books of these modern PhDs. John Wesley, he was against Catholic emancipation in England, and he died opposing it. And the early Methodists opposed it, and most of your Tories in England, because Wesley was a Tory, they were all against Catholic. They wouldn't vote to give Roman Catholics a political vote in England. The Roman Catholics couldn't vote. They couldn't hold political office. Wesley gave his reason. He says, because every Catholic owes his allegiance to the Pope of Rome first, who is also a political leader. Therefore, I cannot trust him with the vote, with the franchise. So it was not given until 1823 or 29. I always get those two dates mixed up. But it was way on into the 19th century before the Catholic Emancipation Act was passed in England. So for many years, they did not believe that a Roman Catholic should be in the political process because of his allegiance to the Pope, and you can see that in America today. We've got now another Roman Catholic president, and of course he's called everything under the sun, but he goes to Mass right away. That's the way Rome works. But I have to look at the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds. So I have to throw up every weapon that I can against the might of Imperial Rome, as the men of Stalingrad threw up their little arms, whatever they could, and suffered death in the process, but finally stopped the German Wehrmacht and proceeded then, as more reinforcements came, to decimate the once proud army of Hitler, so that he lost the war in 1943, although he hung on for another 2 years in Italy and in France and Germany. To defeat sin and to defeat the powers of darkness requires prayer and the preaching of the word, the preaching of the gospel. That's what the Apostle Paul said, and the Lord showed the importance of the preaching of the gospel to sinners, because he said a double anathema to the man who preaches another gospel. And that's why the curse of God is upon many in America, because there's millions preaching and believing another gospel. And that brings down the anathema of God, not the blessing of God. But God promises to bless his people when they separate from infidels and unbelievers and the unclean thing. Then will I receive you and be a father unto you, and I will bless you, and you'll be my sons and daughters, saith the Lord God of Almighty, the Lord of Sabaoth. It's the word there, the Lord of hosts. Anyway, that will have to do me for today, and we'll take that up the next time, looking there at a few more prefatory remarks about Harmartiology. You will be required here to write a paper on Harmartiology in this class this semester, and I will try to look up a few readings there for you in the theology books that you can also be perusing during this time. And I'll try to get these notes out to you also. So until then, may the Lord bless you, is our prayer.